Welcome to the EcoSend Podcast. Be inspired, educated, and entertained by the world's most ambitious leaders, putting climate at the top of their agenda. For an extra special episode of the EcoSend Podcast today. Not just special because we have a chance to put our host in the hot seat, but we're also doing so in person for the first time. So really happy to have James here for our traditional wrap-up episode as we bring season 5 to a close and a bit of a chance to reflect on our guests' stories and lessons from the past season. We've got a real mixture of guests this season, from B Corp consultants, purpose-driven entrepreneurs, podcast coaches, and even an entire episode about sewage and surfing. I think the lessons in the episodes have been just as varied, and we're looking forward to cracking into the episode with you, James, understanding your thoughts. And just if you are tuning in for the first time, the EcoSend Podcast is a platform where we interview founders, marketers, and leaders in sustainability who are creating more climate and community-focused businesses. My name is Chris. I'm the customer success lead here at EcoSend. And today in the hot seat, I'm delighted to welcome back James, our host and CEO, to understand his thoughts and learnings from the past season and from running EcoSend itself. So, James, great to have you here. How are you doing today?
Cheers, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to be doing an episode in person. I'm so excited for this. It's the first time, so let's see how it goes. I'm excited to dig in. Yeah,
amazing. So to kick off, I think one thing that's really inspired me from the 5th season are our guests who initially found themselves working in jobs or in industries that perhaps conflicted with their values, with their kind of mission. I'm thinking in particular of Tim Jones, of when he was working in medical device sales prior to starting his B Corp consultancy, or Michelle Miles, who when she first started in the wedding industry. And then they took this kind of brave leap into moving away from that industry to an industry that aligns much more with their values, or even creating their own businesses. What do you see as the better course of action, to move away from an incompatible industry or to work to change that industry from within?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris. I think, it's been first of all, it's been an incredible series, like Series 5. I can't believe we're already doing Series 5 wrap-up of the podcast, like something that started as you know, a few conversations with inspiring people, and now to have done all these episodes, it's truly an honor to speak to our guests. And I think in this series, there's been so many conversations that have yielded fascinating insights. And as you say, one of the things that's definitely stood out is people sort of switching out or changing roles, changing professions, careers, because of their own values and what they want to do. And I think that's a broader topic that's really interesting to dig into around people don't just want a job. I mean, I would say these days, but I think maybe it's been true forever. Like, people ideally don't just want a job, they want a job that really aligns with what they deeply care about themselves. As you said, Tim and Michelle are both having different approaches to this. I think in terms of, I wouldn't necessarily want to give advice to anyone out there, because I don't feel terribly authoritative enough to do that, but I think it's interesting when we look at it from our perspective. Sometimes it can seem like trying to change your own industry is impossible, or sometimes it can feel like there's no point changing your own industry. How much difference is it going to make? But I think I'd say to anyone who's sort of maybe feeling like that definitely challenge that thought. Okay? I think we for a long time didn't really know if there was anything we could do from a climate perspective or a more wider sort of ethical perspective that would make much of a difference. And well, here we are doing Series 5 of a podcast all about making business a force for good. So I think no matter what industry you're in, there's always an opportunity to do something. And what a great thing to be part of driving that change yourself. And I think, as we might come on to in this episode, often being part of changing an organization or a business for good, it doesn't just make you feel better, it could potentially have some big business consequences too, big positive business impact. So I think it's not an easy path to navigate, but I think there's always there's often a lot more that can be done than people necessarily initially might think.
So I guess the takeaway point is kind of just take action either way. If you're in that position where you're finding you're working somewhere that's not in alignment, start with small steps, whether it's to change from within or to move away, but take action either way.
I think so, and I think that would be my place to start. It's worth trying to change things, and hey, if you do come across too much pushback or you come across real like industry resistance, you quickly find out whether that's something you can individually change. Can you cause a ripple that causes more change, or is that something that at some point you've got to say, hey, no, I'm going to get into a different industry? And you know, some of these industries are very, very hard to change, and maybe too much for one person. But again, I'd say never underestimate what change you can make as an individual, because as an individual today, you have so much more opportunity than ever to make change. The kind of platforms that exist, the ways you can bring people together behind rallying around a cause. I think you see that across all walks of life now. I would just say that would be my first place to start.
You find the answers through exploration.
Yeah, you certainly learned something.
Another big learning, I think, from episode 8, that was with Will Kinchin, is just quite how long it takes for environmental campaigns to reach the public eye. Recently in the UK, we've had a lot of news around how the UK coastline has been affected by sewage, and a lot of coverage in media outlets. But what I understood from the episode from Will was that this is actually a campaign which was started by Surfers Against Sewage years ago, which is only just coming to public eye now. So perhaps we can kind of draw some parallels to what we're doing here at EcoSend with trying to bring attention to the carbon footprint of digital marketing, which is still something that the general public, maybe at large, doesn't quite have an understanding of. So how do you stay motivated to push the message and the mission forward, particularly during these kind of more difficult times?
Yeah, I think the Will episode was a real eye-opener. Yeah, for those maybe not in the UK, there's been a large number of articles in the media about how our waterways, our oceans around the UK are more polluted than ever, and a lot of that is due to waste getting into the water system. I never thought I'd say the word sewage as much as, or hear it as much in a single episode as we did with Will, but it was truly eye-opening. It's something maybe don't always come up in polite conversation, but I think it really opened my eyes a bit to something that we should care about. Like, we should care about the oceans around us, the water we have available to us, and we should care about where waste goes. Like, it's our responsibility as a species. And I think that whole initiative, and hearing it in the media, and then hearing Will say that actually it's something that has been an issue for like a decade or more, was just incredible. And I think it really reminded me of another thing that's sort of more, I've certainly taken notice of in the business world, where things can seem like something or a concept or a product or maybe a founder is an overnight success. And anyone who's built anything will know there's no such thing as an overnight success. You don't wake up and suddenly, well, maybe one or two people get very lucky. But aside from winning the lottery, most of these things take years and years and years of hard work and relentless focus on driving change, driving awareness. And I look at that with what we're doing with EcoSend as well, for sure. I think with EcoSend we're continuously learning about the industry we operate in, what we can and cannot change, what opportunities there are to make more impact in the world. I think we're finding that the change we can have actually goes beyond digital sustainability, but really wider into ethical marketing and how brands communicate with their customers and how they drive consumption even. There's so many big consequential things of the work we're doing. But I think there is a bit of a sort of a wider change in the industry that we are wanting to see and starting to see. And I think these things do take time. They take time to organically develop. I'm not super sure if there are ways of speeding that up without compromising the integrity of what we're trying to do. But I think it's an incredibly exciting time where, what's gone from basically being an idea in a room a bit like this, chatting around, to now being something that is actually impacting thousands and thousands of people all around the world. I think it's incredibly exciting, and I think what drives me is that every day, every week is different. You kind of, no matter how far you go, there's always a new challenge that is different to the last one, which is always changing and always learning from previous mistakes, successes all the time, and that keeps every day kind of fresh and exciting. What challenge will come tomorrow? Who knows?
I suppose it's particularly interesting when you look at the general kind of social media landscape as well, and what gets prioritized by the algorithm tends to be more maybe inflammatory or more controversial or decisive kinds of content. It's how do we keep our message going through without resorting to controversial or this kind of thing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, without plugging email marketing too much, I think there's various things we try to do to try to make sure at the end of the day, I think you've got to build a relationship with your audience. You've got to build trust with your audience, and if you do that, then I truly believe that through whatever algorithm changes or platform shifts there are, if you can earn trust with your audience and you consciously try to create things that you believe will offer value to your audience, value, education, inspiration, entertainment, then you will earn that trust. And if you keep checking in with your audience to make sure you're delivering on that, I think that's what pulls you through the peaks and troughs of any kind of stuff that's outside of you.
Absolutely. Another really interesting episode for me was episode 2. That was with Erin and Andrea Craske, which I think very often in this kind of industry we're in, for purpose-driven companies, the focus is understandably on positive impact, but Erin's episode reminded me that at the same time you need to be profitable. You need to have businesses that stay around. It's no good having the best purpose-driven product in the world if the company goes bust in a few months. So, as an entrepreneur or CEO, you still have to make a living for yourself and for your employees. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, you can also fall into issues with greenwashing and dressing up products that really are just for profit, which are trying to be presented as sustainable when, really their whole purpose is just to maximize shareholder profit. So, in your experience at the helm of EcoSend, do you have any advice for purpose-driven entrepreneurs for how to find that balance or that alignment between purpose and profit?
Yeah, it's a concept we've kind of come back to quite a lot on the podcast and as a team as well, where business being primarily about profit traditionally, and charity being about doing the good stuff, and this belief that there is somewhere in between. There is a way for businesses to do more good in the world, and I truly believe, and from the conversations on the podcast, is fully reinforced and underscored this, that often doing good as a business does not mean chucking your profit away. It usually, and more cases than I can count, doing more good, being more purpose-driven, just has an overwhelmingly large number of positives for the business. Whether it's how much your team are passionate about what you're doing, how much your customers buy into what you're doing, how you as an individual, as a founder, may feel about the work you do every day, getting out of bed every day. I think there's this whole wave of businesses, and the B Corp movement exemplifies that, where organizations and for-profit organizations are doing more and more good, and there are more and more of these businesses than ever before. And I think you look at the jobs people want to be going into these days. It's people don't want to go and clock in 9 to 5 and just take a paycheck home. That is critical. That is crucial to ensure you are earning a crust. But I think those that really are on the job market have options, like they are choosing careers and businesses that have a greater purpose than just revenue and profit, that are perhaps trying to make things a little bit better in the world in some way. And I think for businesses, there's so many reasons why, specifically caring about sustainability is a good business decision in itself. There's various research around sort of companies that clearly, coherently, transparently communicate their sustainability values builds a tremendous amount of trust with consumers and buyers. And I think we all know that when consumers trust a brand, they are more likely to buy from them and more likely to be loyal to that brand. So I think there's just this huge growing set of evidence that doing the right thing, caring for your employees, caring for your supply chain, caring about the planet, caring about communities, it's also just good business. And that's the kind of business I want us to be doing, and I want to see more of in the world, frankly.
Yeah, definitely. I think ideally the incentives are coming from multiple angles, where we're increasingly seeing consumer trends preferring sustainability or sustainable products. I think it was a PwC statistic that consumers are prepared to pay, I think it was 9.7% more for a sustainable product. Then you have maybe the younger generation who are looking to work specifically for companies that provide tangible, positive impacts to the environment. And increasingly regulation is looking to make sure that companies are looking at their supply chain. So hopefully it comes from all of those angles to drive everything forward.
Totally, it really is a bit of a carrot and stick kind of approach. Totally agree.
We're at the end of our 5th season of the podcast now, if you can believe it. We kicked off the first season of the show way back in November 2022, which was like a lifetime ago. What do you think has changed across the digital marketing sustainability landscape from when we kicked off our first episode up until where we're at today?
Yeah, it's incredible. The time's flown by over since series 1. I think there's been a few things. I think one of the really remarkable and positive things has been just seeing more and more people talking about caring about digital sustainability, but also caring about ethical ways of doing business in general. And I think partly this could be that, I myself and us as a team have been more and more absorbed in the world of both sustainability and of more ethical marketing practices. But I think also when you speak to people in those industries, they can feel this rise in care about this stuff. And I think that's a really, really positive thing to see. Because more people talking alone is a good thing. You learn more people become aware of these topics, and more people being aware of and learning about these topics means more people are going to start going and finding things out for themselves, improving in the collective massive knowledge around how to do things a little bit better on all fronts. I think has grown considerably, and that trend just seems to be growing. I think there's also been elements that have also been positive from a digital sustainability perspective. I think, when you look at the technologies that are being used and a lot of providers in the space, there is a lot more care for renewable energy usage wherever possible. There's also more efficiencies coming into play in a lot of areas, which is great. But I think some of the challenge is that we've also got more and more demand than ever for the digital technologies we all live with every day. I mean, how many devices are in this room alone? But I think one thing that's really obvious that's come out in that timeline is the growth of generative AI and all of the ramifications of that, both from a sustainability perspective and energy usage perspective. The demands are huge, just unfathomable energy demands from Gen AI and the compute resources needed for that, but also from the generative marketing and AI side of things, where we've got these tools in our hands as creators, as marketers, as anyone now, to create like never before. And what are the ramifications of that for some of these professions that have been established over decades, if not centuries? And I think there's some really big questions that continue to be forming around some of this profession. I think I am an optimist, and so I think we will find ways to work through these things, and things will find the natural equilibrium. And I think a lot of our AI hopes are perhaps overinflated at the moment. There's still a lot of questions about how helpful some of the technology is, and when it will get to a point where it's more helpful than over-promising. But yeah, I think there's a lot of questions there that have come up in just a short space of time, and I think there's going to be a lot more uncertainty, but a lot more opportunity over the coming few years on all fronts.
So overall, take you're optimistic.
Yeah.
You're quoted now on the recording.
No, I am optimistic. I think there's some incredibly smart people doing amazing work, especially around how we can live richer and richer lives with our digital lives, especially, then caring more and more about the energy consumption there at all levels of the stack, from building data centers that are more and more efficient to websites that are more and more conscious of every single tiny pixel that is on the page. And then from an AI perspective, there's some of the smartest minds in the world working on this right now, and a lot of people are trying to find ways of doing things in the right way. A lot of people are not, but there's a lot of people that are. So, yeah.
I think I echo that with every episode. It seems like you understand the challenge even more, which can be depressing. But at the same time, when we're speaking to these guests, we're understanding that there are so many people out there doing these offering these incredibly creative solutions to the problems.
Yeah.
That also fills you with a tremendous amount of hope.
Yeah.
You have to have the awareness of the problem first, which is the kind of dip in the cold pool. But then you realise actually there are really good, smart people working on these things. So that is exciting. James, we're losing your time, but wrapping up as always with my favourite question. If you had to pick out one lesson from a guest this season that really stood out for you, what would it be?
I love this question, Chris. I always find it so hard to pick just one, because there's been some wonderful. I mean, every episode is a joy, and as I said at the start, it really is one of the great honours of my role at EcoSend, being able to speak to these so many amazing guests we've had on the show over the last few years. I think there are a few episodes that really stood out to me. I think Cathy was a really inspiring one from A Good Thing, yeah. And I just think this sort of idea that businesses have loads of stuff they don't need. We've been in this position ourselves. Like, even as a small team, we still had a lot of stuff in a storage container after the pandemic, and trying to just get rid of that stuff in a responsible way is a really difficult thing. In one of the biggest cities in the world, how do we give it to anyone? How do we give it a new lease of life? And obviously on the flip side of that, there's people that need things that businesses have, whether that's old computers, chairs, desks, whiteboards, whatever. We had that problem. We were in search of a solution, and Cathy and her team have built that solution. And they haven't built it by becoming a huge VC-backed organization, raising millions of pounds. Like, they built it themselves, like in their kitchen, I think, and just made it happen. And that's just a great example of like one of the wonderful things about, I think, it drew us originally to like building software. It's like, you can build something online and it can impact in the real world thousands and thousands of people. I think that was a wonderful, wonderful thing. I would also say, and Tim, the B Corp bloke, Tim, was really reminding me that, when we talk about things like the B Corp movement, the B Corp B Corp is relatively new. Like it's only been around for 5 to 10 years, I think it is. And it feels like this movement that's growing. But Tim really reminded me, going back to basics, that it's almost a move back to how business originally was, like hundreds of years ago, back when business was considered, in a small community, there would maybe be businesses that looked after their staff, that cared about the community they were in. And you couldn't be a business in a small village and not care about your community. Otherwise you would, so I think it was a good reminder that we're maybe going back to the real OG business days with some of the practices we're talking about as being new today. And then I think finally, Matt and Chrissie from Olsen, we tried something new with that podcast episode, and I highly recommend if you haven't seen it to check it out, because we had two guests, Matt and Chrissie, both co-founders of their agency, but they had a slide deck, and it was all about how you can take steps towards becoming a more sustainable business. And by using the analogy of no one just gets up and runs a marathon. You've got to get out of the house, you've got to put your trainers on, you've got to start taking steps. I just thought it was such an inspiring episode, because it really showed that we can all make some changes, and some of those changes are small, some of those changes may not even have much impact, but even tiny changes, they sort of start you on a journey. And I think when you look at the wider world, I am conscious that many of the people listening to this podcast, maybe you're already quite a few steps ahead on that journey, but there's hundreds, there's thousands, there's millions of people out there that have not yet made a single step. And I think, that's a great episode for anyone in that position.
James, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Where can people find you?
I'm on the EcoSend every day, and do give us a follow on all of the usual channels. Be sure to check out the EcoSend newsletter as well, which we proudly put out every Friday. Get me on LinkedIn if you want. Otherwise, check out EcoSend if you haven't already.
Amazing. And thanks to everyone for tuning in to this special edition episode. We'll be back very soon with season 6 of the episode podcast. Already got many fantastic guests really lined up, so really looking forward to sharing that with you very soon. So thank you again, James.
Thanks, Chris.